insulting me is a badge of honor for me, but I think we all know, as both as a educator for a couple decades and as a parent, using that term is just so damaging. It's hurtful. We have fought 3 decades to get this out of our schools. Kids know better than to use it. But look, this is what Donald Trump has done.
Is happening. I just don't think that you need to go the extra mile and make a claim as extreme as they're funding a terrorist group in Somalia until you have the goods, until you can actually prove that's happening. And let's also keep in mind that the U.S. government does a good enough job stealing our money to fund foreign terror groups as it is. So maybe there should be some ire directed toward the U.S.
You really aren't ready for this. Ana Kasparian abruptly accelerated and sent Tim Walz hurtling across the internet due to an alleged fraud issue in Somalia. The inflow of receipts starts. Those sharp side looks reveal more than words could, and sarcasm has great force. Narratives shift in real time. Shatter is justified when the spin cycle breaks down. Is this political statement a well-timed attack? Or is it the precise moment when everything begins to fall apart? Grab some popcorn, look at your jaw, and see what happens when serious questions are put under actual strain. Silence becomes loud, quick, and unforgettable instead of staying silent.
Minnesota in particular.
At first it was Minnesota, but then it was later reported.
It's all 50 states?
All 50 states, they have to provide evidence that, you know.
Oh, I didn't realize that you brought it in.
Yeah, so basically law-abiding, you know,
okay, maybe
child
that's a little bit
daycares.
overboard. I thought it was just that state.
Yeah, that is overboard. I want to be clear about something. Due to the massive amount of COVID aid that flowed into states across the country, fraud has been a problem, not just in Minnesota, but all across the country. In fact,
when Ana Kasparian turns to face Tim Walz, the tone abruptly shifts from calm political analysis to a masterful demolition delivered with a smile, a mountain of backstory, and an utterly ruthless sense of humor.
Off of something that broke earlier this year in November, there was a huge story that was published in the New York Times about fraud cases in the Minneapolis area. And most of these, you know, nonprofits or these little businesses that were popping up and basically benefiting from COVID era public money were Somali owned. Now, 2 things are happening at the same time. On one hand, these fraud cases appear to be very serious and very real.
This isn't a conversation, a back and forth, or even a simple misunderstanding that can be cleared up with a polite nod. In this one-sided exchange, Ana Kasparian calmly drives Tim Walz's talking points off the verge of believability while he sits in the passenger seat.
Here, just another day. Okay, so a YouTuber named Nick Shirley uncovered tens and arguably even he claims $100 million of fraud in Minnesota under Governor Tim Walz's.
Tim Walz shows up in this scenario looking like the trustworthy Midwestern leader, the kind of politician who should be explaining crop rotation or commending a high school marching band.
The bad faith actors who might be using this for terrible political purposes, the fact remains that it appears that close to $9 billion, according to prosecutors, have been stolen from taxpayers in the Minneapolis area as a result of these fraudulent businesses. And I want to give you more details about it in just a second, but before I do, Jane.
Unfortunately for him, that positive image doesn't turn into armor when difficult questions start to pile up like unpaid bills. Ana Kasparian immediately sees the image as adornment rather than content, because genuine skill will be replaced by positive energy when oversight begins to fade. Ana makes sure the Somali fraud problem doesn't creep into the story by depicting it as the obvious elephant in the room that Tim Walz insists is actually a lovely ottoman. His persistent claims that everything is under control start to seem more like wishful thinking than assurance, especially when management seems to involve hoping no one follows up.
To be under the assumption, and this was, I guess, a terrible assumption to have because it's not true, that there would be a recalibration of some of these policies in order to actually serve the best interests of the American people. But what I've noticed, certainly on a local level, is that there's absolutely no self-reflection, no recalibration of said policies. And on a national level, there seems to be more interest in serving the egos and, you know, the narcissism of Democratic leaders.
It sounds impressive at first, until you notice it never really stops. Tim Walz's reliance on formal procedures and layers of bureaucracy slowly turns into a running joke. Not because the issue is trivial, but because repeating the process starts to feel like ducking behind office paperwork. Ana Kasparian slices through that tactic with ease. making it clear that complexity doesn't erase responsibility and confusion isn't the same as being blameless. Things heat up when she highlights the gap between Walz's carefully polished public image and the tough reality of leading when pressure is high. This is the same figure praised for steady leadership and strong ethics, yet that sense of clarity fades when the spotlight lands somewhere uncomfortable. Ana points out that the contradiction, promising openness while delivering murky answers, is a textbook case of political image-making backfiring. As the explanations pile up, the humor grows, with each reply drifting further into abstraction until the defense sounds like a group project where no one wants to admit they missed their part. In her telling, every new response only sparks more questions, turning confidence into something offered but never truly delivered. Rather than casting Walz as a clever schemer, the picture that emerges is arguably more damaging in politics.
Emphasize childcare centers where Shirley shows up during weekday business hours to find that there are actually no children present. There are also some pretty extreme claims that we need more evidence for, which I'll get into in just a second. So a claim was just kind of casually made about how this money is then being siphoned off and sent over to Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group that operates out of Somalia. Now, there hasn't been any evidence provided.
Ana Kasparian zooms in just enough to make one thing unmistakably clear. This is not a swipe at a community. Despite efforts by some narratives to shift the focus, the Somali community is not the target here. If anything, they're the ones paying the price for poor administration and political misdirection. As Ana points out, hiding behind marginalized groups isn't just ineffective, it's deeply disrespectful, especially when the real concern is oversight and responsibility at the highest levels. That's where Tim Walz's broader record comes into view, not as a distraction but as context that makes the situation feel even more absurd. Long praised for steady leadership during difficult moments, this is a governor known for calm control and ethical clarity, yet now he seems unsettled by straightforward questions, treating them as personal jabs. Ana leans into that irony, reminding viewers that true leadership isn't measured by smooth sailing, but by how challenges are handled when things get uncomfortable. The critique sharpens further when she turns to the media space around Walz, where quiet avoidance and soft coverage feel intentional rather than accidental.
The Department of Health and Human Services has decided to effectively punish all child care centers in the state of Minnesota by halting federal child care payments toward the state. And of course, this is over allegations that some of these child care centers are engaging in fraud. Now, Deputy HHS Secretary Jim O'Neill said in a post on X that funds will be released only when states prove they aren't being spent.
Ana Kasparian makes it clear that real leadership takes more than sidestepping words that hint at responsibility, and her sharp tone shows open frustration with what sounds like clever wording meant to dodge the issue. The constant mentions of reviews, procedures, and investigations begin to feel less like explanations and more like a soothing chant designed to help people forget the problem altogether. She then turns to the idea of trust, not as something warm or symbolic, but as a political resource that drains quickly when it's misused. Instead of pointing to one dramatic collapse, Tim Walz's loss of trust is framed as the result of many moments where avoiding a straight answer was convenient and openness was treated as optional. Ana's sarcasm shines here, highlighting how trust is often treated as endlessly refillable, even when the proof suggests otherwise. She also widens the lens to examine his broader record, using his own carefully stated values as a quiet but powerful contrast to the current situation.
So over and over again, you'll see them go visit various childcare facilities and you'll see that there's no one there, there are no children, and sometimes they'll find workers there and they'll ask some questions. The workers are very evasive. And I should note that while, yes, it is true that prosecutors have already been investigating similar fraud cases in the area and there have already been arrests, what's important to know about the businesses that were visited by Shirley and David here, we're still receiving.
Ana Kasparian makes one point unmistakable. Questions don't disappear just because someone pretends they're not there. Tim Walz seems to be betting that optimism and patience will fix what clear answers have not, assuming that time will smooth over gaps left by a lack of openness. As the critique continues, Ana pushes back on the idea that questioning equals hostility, framing doubt not as an attack, but as a reasonable expectation. Walz's defensive posture comes across as a misunderstanding of leadership itself, as though responsibility were a choice instead of part of the job. The humor stays sharp and controlled, never spiraling, because the facts do the heavy lifting. Gradually, the mood shifts from non-stop teasing to a quieter, more serious warning. One controversy rarely ends a political career, but how it's handled can slowly weaken it.
Indicating that certain requirements would need to be met before federal grants are approved for childcare programs in all states, not just Minnesota. With that in mind, let's take a look at what he had to say.
I have activated our Defend the Spend system for all ACF childcare payments across America. Starting today, we require a justification, receipt, or photo evidence before we make a payment. Second, I have just signed and sent a demand letter to Governor Walz. I required a full 360 review.
By the end, the audience walks away informed, entertained, and aware that this exchange was far more than casual talk. It was a full-scale critique, sharp enough to sting, yet solid enough to last. The power of the moment comes from Ana Kasparian's refusal to let Tim Walz take cover behind the soft shield of respectability politics, where titles and past wins are often treated like automatic protection. In her framing, higher office doesn't reduce scrutiny, it magnifies it, making unanswered questions echo even louder. Each effort to redirect attention toward accomplishments or legacy is calmly but persistently guided back to outcomes and responsibility, as if to underline that sincerity alone can't replace accountability. The longer Walz remains in focus, the more his approach feels like someone rearranging furniture during a fire alarm, trusting that order will distract from the smoke. Ana sharpens this picture by showing how official reassurances have faded into background sound, with repetition standing in for real resolution.
Of the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families said none of the 10 childcare centers that YouTuber Nick Shirley recently visited for his viral video had their payments paused, although a couple were previously closed down by the state, and state workers are doing visits to the rest today. So these facilities, even though there was prior knowledge by the state that there was fraud going on, these facilities were still receiving these government grants.
When everyday people mishandle money or fail at basic oversight, the fallout is swift and serious. Yet in politics, those same missteps are often brushed off as lessons instead of breaches of trust. Ana Kasparian highlights that imbalance with controlled, pointed sarcasm, never raising her voice while making it obvious how responsibility seems to fade the closer it gets to power. As the discussion unfolds, Tim Walz's repeated emphasis on calm authority starts to feel less comforting and more carefully staged, like demonstrating safety procedures after danger has already arrived. Rather than framing that calm as confidence, Ana presents it as insulation, a way to keep real accountability at arm's length. Her point lands clearly. Without real substance, steadiness is just stillness dressed up as strength. She also pushes back on the common political belief that lasting through controversy means winning it, or that staying in office somehow proves correctness. By showing how unresolved questions linger long after elections are won or approval numbers stay intact, Ana reminds the audience that survival is not the same thing as vindication.
Clear what he means by the photo evidence. Like, what is that going to prove? He says upon receipt of payment. What do you want a photo of? Do you want photos of children at the daycare centers? I don't know. There was a lack of clarity there. I personally don't have any problem whatsoever with increased oversight of how public money is being spent, because it is true that fraud is a problem, not just in Minnesota, but fraud has been a huge problem in many states, as I've mentioned, California being one of them, because there was this massive infusion of COVID era money from the federal government to the states in order to keep people whole as, shutdowns were taking place and people were losing their jobs. That's always going to unfortunately.
Unanswered gaps turn into quiet accusations because Ana Kasparian treats what's left unsaid as meaningful on its own, knowing that silence can reveal just as much as repetition. Tim Walz presents his avoidance of details as a deliberate move, not a constraint, but once choices are noticed, they tend to follow leaders everywhere. As the critique winds down, Ana stresses that leadership isn't just about avoiding mistakes. It's about addressing problems before doubt has time to grow. Walz's response to the Somali fraud issue becomes a cautionary example of what happens when image management takes priority over openness. The humor earns laughs at first, then gives way to an uneasy pause that lingers after the punchlines fade. There's no tidy wrap-up, because unresolved issues rarely offer one. Instead, Ana leaves Walz balanced between authority and responsibility, where charm can't outrun scrutiny and patience thins with every carefully phrased reply. Not everything is reduced to ashes, but the marks are unmistakable, serving as a reminder that avoidance, silence, and polished language are never harmless when public trust is on the line.